The test came back face down. That was how Mrs. Petrakis always did it. Tests returned face down. So you had to flip it yourself, so the moment of finding out was private, contained, something that happened to you alone at your desk. Mira appreciated this, usually. Today it made the 37 seconds between receiving the paper and turning it over feel like standing at the edge of something tall. She flipped it. The number at the top was written in red. Not circled, just written. Mrs. Petrakis' handwriting was very precise. It said 14/100. Around Mira, the sound of papers turning. The shuffling of the classroom recalibrating. Who did well, who didn't. The invisible social geometry of knowing. Someone 2 rows back whispered something. Someone else laughed quickly and then stopped. Mira looked at the test. Her work was there. Every problem attempted. Every line of work shown, the way the directions said. But her work looked nothing like the answer key scrawled in the margins in red. Problem 7. Find the area of a triangle with base 6 and height 4. Mira had written 4 lines of reasoning. In those 4 lines, she had described the triangle as a thing that was leaning and asked what happened to the space inside it when you pressed the top point down flat, and concluded that the space inside was exactly half of what the rectangle made by its edges would hold. She got the right answer. 12. Red pen through it anyway. Show proper formula. A equals 1/2 BH. She had shown the formula, just not in a way that looked like the formula. Mira, Mrs. Petrakis was standing at the front, not looking at her, looking at the board, where she'd written 2 names. 2 students whose answers she wanted to discuss as a class. One of them was Mira's name. Her problem was on the board. The 4 lines of spatial reasoning. The triangle that leaned. The pressing down. 23 classmates staring at it. Can someone tell me, Mrs. Petrakis said, in the voice of someone being very careful, what the issue is with this approach? 3 hands went up. Mira kept her eyes on her desk. She already knew what they were going to say. It doesn't follow the procedure. It doesn't look like math. It looks like she made it up. What she could not explain, to them, to Mrs. Petrakis, to anyone, was that she hadn't made it up. She had seen it. The way you see something right in front of you. The way you see your own hand. After class, Mrs. Petrakis stopped her at the door. Mira, a pause. This is the 4th test this semester. I know. I have to tell your mother. And I need you to understand that if the standardized assessment results come back the same way, she stopped. Reorganized. There's a conversation happening about whether you're ready for 8th grade. Mira nodded. She kept her face very still. She walked out into the hallway, where the fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency that she had always experienced as slightly too high. And she stood for a moment with the test folded in her hand, and she thought about the triangle on the board. The way it leaned. The way the space inside it had made complete, physical sense to her. She thought about the fact that she had been right, and gotten 14 out of 100. The school bus let Mira off at the end of Calle Durango at 3:47, same as always. The walk home was 4 blocks through high desert, creosote and red dust, and a sky so wide it sometimes felt like a threat. She liked this walk. Nobody to look at her. The house smelled like coffee going stale. Carmen had been up since 5 and wouldn't be back from the medical center until 7. The note on the counter said, leftovers in the fridge, Layla home by 5, love. Layla was home by 4:30, actually. She came through the door carrying a rolled poster tube and something that caught the light. A small trophy, a new one, bronze-colored, for the Regional Mathematics Invitational. She set it on the counter without ceremony, the way people set down things they've been told to value until the valuing becomes automatic. She looked at Mira sitting at the table. She looked at the test, which Mira had made the mistake of leaving flat on the table instead of in her bag. Layla picked it up. Read the number. Set it back down. Same thing, she said. Mira said nothing. Did you study? Yes. Layla sat down across from her. There was something in her expression that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite frustration. It was something more complicated that she had never found a word for. This feeling she got when she looked at her sister's failures. Something adjacent to guilt for not failing herself. You have to show the formula, Layla said. That's all they want. The formula. I know what they want. Then just. I know, Layla. A silence. The trophy sat between them on the counter. Layla had placed first in 2 categories at the invitational. Mira knew this because the school had sent an email. She knew this because Mrs. Petrakis had mentioned Layla's name at the end of their conversation. Just briefly. Just enough to let the contrast exist in the air between them like something physical. Mom's going to see it, Layla said, meaning the test. I know. She's going to call the school. I know. Layla picked up the trophy from the counter and took it to her room. She did this quietly, without announcement, and Mira understood that it was an act of consideration, removing the contrast, making the air slightly easier to breathe. It was kindness. It was also an acknowledgement that the contrast existed, which was its own kind of thing to carry. Carmen came home at 7:15. She set down her bag. She kissed Myra's forehead. She opened the refrigerator and stood in front of it for a moment without taking anything out. Then she saw the test. She didn't say anything right away. She read it. She looked at Myra's work, the 4 lines, the leaning triangle, the spatial reasoning that had been crossed out in red. Her face was very still in the way that faces are still when they are doing significant internal work. I'm going to call the school tomorrow, she said. I know. Mira, I know, Mom. Carmen sat down. She looked at her daughter's face, really looked, the way she sometimes didn't have time to. And she started to say something and then stopped. There was a question behind her eyes that she didn't have the language to form. She picked up her phone instead. The principal's office had a window that faced the parking lot and a photograph of the state capitol building on the wall and a succulent on the desk that had been there so long it had become part of the furniture. Carmen sat in the chair closest to the door. Mira sat beside her. Principal Harmon was a careful man. He chose words the way you choose which path to take across a frozen surface, testing each one before committing weight to it. Mira is a bright girl, he said, which was a thing people said when they were about to say something else. What is the assessment? Carmen asked. She had her hands in her lap. Her work badge was still clipped to her shirt. The state's standardized assessment is in 19 days. If Myra's score falls below the threshold again, he paused. This would be the second year. The district protocol at that point is retention. The words sat on the desk between them. Carmen asked about tutoring. Harmon mentioned limited resources. Carmen asked about testing accommodations. Harmon mentioned the process for evaluation, which would take 6 to 8 weeks, which was longer than 19 days. Carmen's jaw tightened. She asked if there was anything else. There wasn't. In the hallway, Mira had been waiting on the bench outside the office. She heard most of it through the door, which was not fully closed. She heard threshold and retention and second year, and she sat with her hands pressed flat on the bench, and she counted the tiles on the floor, not in numbers, exactly, but in the physical sense of them. The way the grout lines created a grid, the way the grid could be folded if you imagined it as a surface rather than a floor. She was still counting when Carmen came out. Carmen looked at her for a moment. Then she looked away, down the hall, at nothing. Let's go home, she said. At home, Mira went to her room and locked the door. She sat on the edge of her bed. She sat for a long time without moving. Then she reached under the mattress and pulled out the notebook. It was brown, composition style, its spine cracked from use. The first page was dated 2 years ago. She turned past the dated pages, past the diagrams of folded triangles, the rotated polygons, the spatial explorations that filled the margins, until she reached the middle section. The section she had never shown anyone. The formula was there. Or not a formula exactly. More like a diagram so dense with relationship and proportion that it had become, over months of refinement, a proof. She had started it by accident, trying to understand why 2 triangles with different shapes could have the same internal angles. She had begun drawing the space between them. What happened in the gaps? How the gaps changed as the triangles moved. And she had found something. She ran her finger over it without pressing down, the way you trace something fragile. The door to her room opened. She hadn't heard Layla knock. She looked up. Layla was standing in the doorway. She'd heard the meeting summary from Carmen. Her expression was doing that complicated thing again, the thing that wasn't pity. Her eyes dropped to the notebook. Mira closed it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Layla said, very quietly, "What is that?" Mira slid the notebook back under the mattress. "Nothing," she said. Layla looked at the place where the notebook had been. Then she looked at Mira. Something in her face shifted, an almost question she didn't ask, and then she stepped back into the hallway and pulled the door almost closed. And Mira sat alone in her room, her hand still on the mattress above the notebook, her heart going somewhere fast. That night, after Carmen's light went out and Layla's music stopped, Mira got up. She sat on the floor with her back against the bed. She opened the notebook in the dark, using the light from the window, a half moon, enough for her to see the diagrams she had memorized anyway. She turned to the middle section. The world that existed in these pages was not the world of Mrs. Petrakis's board. It was not the world of formulas written in a specific order for a specific reason. It was a world of shapes that breathed, numbers that had weight, relationships that you could feel before you could prove. Here is what Mira had found. She had been drawing two triangles, one equilateral, one scalene, and trying to understand what happened when you overlapped them, one corner pressed into the interior of the other. She wanted to know about the region where they intersected, not the area of it, the shape of it, how the shape changed as one triangle rotated around the other. She began to notice something. The intersecting region, as the rotating triangle moved through specific angles, traced a curve, not a random curve, a predictable one. The curve's dimensions were mathematically related to the ratio of the triangle's respective perimeters. She spent 2 months checking this, rotating, redrawing, checking. It was always true. She had no name for it. She had no framework for knowing what kind of discovery it was, or whether it was a discovery at all. She knew only that every time she drew it, it worked. The curve appeared. The ratio held. She looked at the diagram for a long time in the half-dark. She thought about Mrs. Petrakis's red pen through her triangle problem. Show proper formula. She had shown it, just not in a language the test could read. This was the gap she lived in every day, between what she saw and what anyone would accept as seeing. She closed the notebook. She was going to have to take the standardized assessment in 19 days. 18 now. The notebook wouldn't help her pass it. The notebook existed in a different language entirely. She put it back under the mattress and lay on top of the bed without getting under the covers. She looked at the ceiling and she thought, the way she always thought, not in words exactly, but in shapes and their relationships, in the physical sense of things that were true. She thought about the space between two triangles. And she thought about how it had taken her 2 months to understand something she was certain of every time she drew it. She thought about what it would mean if she'd been wrong all along. She pressed her eyes closed. Morning came slowly in the high desert. The light changed color 3 times before it became day. Mrs. Petrakis was out Tuesday. A substitute was noted on the whiteboard in green marker. Ms. Okafor, guest instructor. Mira registered this without particular feeling. Substitutes in this school were usually college students doing practicum hours, or retired teachers doing it for extra income, or occasionally a parent pressed into service during a staffing crisis. They followed the lesson plan on the desk. They kept order. They filled time. Ms. Okafor walked in carrying nothing. No lesson plan. No textbook. No folder. Just herself, somewhere in her late 30s, wearing green earrings and a jacket that looked academic in a way Mira couldn't fully define, moving to the front of the room with the ease of someone who was used to standing in front of rooms. She looked at the class. She didn't take attendance first. She picked up a dry erase marker and drew a shape on the board. Not a labeled diagram. Just a shape. A quadrilateral with irregular sides. Something between a square and a trapezoid. "Tell me what you see," she said. Silence. The class was waiting for the actual lesson to start. "Really," Ms. Okafor said. "I'm asking. What do you see when you look at this shape?" A boy in the second row said, "A quadrilateral." "Okay. What else?" Another pause. A girl said it looked like a door that wasn't quite right. Ms. Okafor nodded. "A door that isn't quite right. What does that mean, not quite right? What would make it right?" The girl thought about it. If the sides were even. Even how? All the same length? Or the angles even? The class began, tentatively, to engage. Mira did not raise her hand. She had learned not to. But her eyes were doing something they didn't usually do in Mrs. Petrakis's class. They were moving across the board with something that was almost hunger. Ms. Okafor's shape was interesting. It was unresolved. It had interior tension, the way it leaned toward regularity without quite reaching it. What would happen, Mira was thinking, if you started folding that shape along its diagonal? She had picked up her pencil. She was not aware of having done this. She was drawing on the margin of her worksheet. A series of small diagrams, the shape as drawn, then the shape slightly rotated, then folded, then what emerged from the fold. She was moving quickly, the pencil making almost no sound, her eyes going from the board to the paper and back. She did not notice Ms. Okafor moving through the rows. She did not notice Ms. Okafor stop. "What's this?" Mira looked up. Ms. Okafor was looking at the margin of her worksheet, at the diagrams. Her expression was not the expression Mira expected, not the exasperation of pay attention and not the performative patience of let's stay focused. It was something else. Something pointed and still. I was listening, Mira said. I know, Ms. Okafor said. I'm asking about the diagrams. Mira looked at them, looked at Ms. Okafor, said nothing. The bell rang. The class stood, gathered, left. The noise of 30 kids leaving filled the room, and then it was quiet. Can you stay for a few minutes? Ms. Okafor said. Not a question exactly. Not an order either. Mira stayed. The classroom was quieter than classrooms usually were. Afternoon light came in through the west-facing windows at a low angle and lit the dust in the air. Ms. Okafor had pulled 2 chairs to face each other in the front of the room. She sat in one. She put Myra's old test on the desk between them. She'd found it in Mrs. Petrakis's grade folder. Problem 7. The leaning triangle. The spatial reasoning crossed out in red. Walk me through this, Ms. Okafor said. Not the answer. The thinking. Mira looked at her own work. She had read her own crossed-out reasoning so many times that she had stopped seeing it as anything other than evidence of failure. Looking at it now, under Ms. Okafor's expectant attention, it looked different. It looked like something she had written. The triangle is leaning, she started, and then stopped. She didn't know how to continue without sounding strange. Keep going, Ms. Okafor said. Her voice was steady and entirely without the quality of someone waiting to be surprised. It's leaning. And if you press the top point flat, the shape would become a rectangle. But the area doesn't change when you do that. The space inside stays the same. So the area of the triangle is half the rectangle because the triangle is the rectangle with half of itself cut away by the lean. She stopped. And the rectangle, Ms. Okafor said, would be the base times the height. Yes. So the triangle is half that. Yes. That is, Ms. Okafor said, the formula. You derived it from spatial reasoning rather than memorizing it as an abstraction. She paused. You got the right answer. I got a 0. You used an unlabeled process. That's a different problem. Ms. Okafor looked at the test for a moment. Then she looked at Mira. How long have you been thinking about math this way? Always, Mira said. And then, because it felt important to be precise, I thought everyone did. Something moved across Ms. Okafor's face. Briefly, she didn't explain it. Do you have other work like this? Things you've worked out on your own. The notebook was under Myra's mattress. It was at home, 2 miles away, hidden under a mattress in a room with a lock on the door, and still Mira felt the question brush against it like a physical thing. Sort of, she said. Would you be willing to show me? The light through the windows had shifted. It was orange now, lower. Mira looked at Ms. Okafor's face. She tried to find what was behind it. The waiting for the trick, the patient institutional tolerance that would eventually turn into the same red pen. She had gotten good at finding this. It was usually there within the first few minutes. She couldn't find it. Maybe, she said. She went home. She sat on her bed. She held the notebook in her lap without opening it. She thought about the formula. About the way Ms. Okafor had said you derived it like it was a specific, notable thing to have done. She thought about the middle section. The months of rotating triangles. The curve that kept appearing. She thought about being wrong again. About showing someone something she was certain of and watching them cross it out in red. The fear of that was so large she could see it the way she saw in numbers. As something physical, with weight and edges and the specific texture of things that have been true for a long time. She set the notebook on her bed. She sat beside it for a very long time. The next morning, she brought it to school. Ms. Okafor was there again. Mrs. Petrakis's absence had extended. After class, the chairs again. Mira sat with the notebook in her lap. She didn't hand it over. She held it. She opened it to the middle section. She turned it so Ms. Okafor could see the page. Ms. Okafor looked at it. She didn't say anything right away. Mira watched her face. She watched Ms. Okafor's eyes move across the diagram. The 2 triangles, one equilateral, one scalene. The rotation sequence, the intersecting region and the curve it traced. The notation Mira had invented for herself because she didn't know the proper notation. The ratio relationship written out in Myra's particular numerical shorthand. Ms. Okafor was quiet for a long time. Walk me through this one, she said finally. Mira did. She explained the 2 triangles. She explained what had interested her, the gap between them, the intersecting region, the question of what shape that region made as one triangle moved through the other. She explained the curve. She explained why she was certain the ratio held. Because she had checked it dozens of times. Because every time she drew it, it appeared. Because the relationship felt as physically true as the ground under a chair. She talked for 6 minutes. Ms. Okafor did not interrupt. When Mira stopped, Ms. Okafor was very still. She reached for her phone. She searched for something. She read. She searched again. She looked at the diagram. She read again. Mira, she said, and her voice had changed in a way that Mira couldn't categorize. What? Do you know what this describes? A relationship between the intersection curve and the perimeter ratio. It describes, Ms. Okafor said slowly, a spatial property related to what mathematicians call affine geometry. The relationship you've identified here, the proportional curve, it's not in any 7th grade curriculum. It's barely in undergraduate curricula. She paused. You found this yourself. I was trying to understand how the shapes worked. I know. Ms. Okafor set her phone down. She looked at Mira fully. I want to show this to someone. A colleague of mine. He teaches at the university in Albuquerque. He works in geometric proofs. Mira felt something happen in her chest. Not exactly hope. Something more like the moment before hope, when hope is still dangerous. To show him what? She said. To show him what you found. Mira looked down at the notebook. At the diagram she had drawn over months, alone, under a half moon, without knowing if it meant anything to anyone other than her. She thought about Mrs. Petrakis's red pen. She thought about the word retention. She thought about Layla's trophy on the counter. She reached out and took the notebook back. She held it against her chest. And before she fully knew what she was doing, before she could talk herself out of it or into it, she opened to the middle section. And she tore the pages out. 3 pages. The diagram. The rotation sequence. The ratio notation. She tore them in one motion and crumpled them in her fist, and Ms. Okafor reached forward, not to stop her, just reaching, and said, Mira. The pages were already in pieces. Mira was breathing like she had run somewhere. The pieces sat on the desk between them. Ms. Okafor did not move. She did not speak. She looked at the pieces, and then she looked at Mira, and she waited. I can't be wrong again, Mira said. Her voice was very quiet. I can't show someone and have them. She stopped. She pressed her fist against her mouth. Okay, Ms. Okafor said. Just that. Okay. Not a solution. Not a reassurance. Just the word, offered like something held out in an open hand. Mira looked at the torn pieces. I have it memorized, she said. Every line. Ms. Okafor came to the house at 6:30 that evening. Mira watched through the window as the car stopped at the curb. She had not told anyone Ms. Okafor was coming, because she had not known. She watched the door, and a minute later, Carmen answered it, and 2 minutes after that, Carmen called her name from the hallway with a voice that held a question. They sat in the kitchen, Carmen, Mira, and Ms. Okafor. Layla was doing homework in her room. The overhead light was on, and it made everyone look slightly tired. Ms. Okafor put the torn pieces on the kitchen table. Carmen looked at them. She looked at Mira. She tore them, Ms. Okafor said. Not accusingly, just factually. I want to explain what they were before she did. She explained. She was careful and precise, and she did not use language that was either condescending or performatively academic. She said, Mira has been working out geometric relationships on her own. She has been doing this for some time. What she found in this notebook is not something a 12-year-old should be able to find through intuition alone. It is something that required her to be doing something that most people cannot do, which is to experience mathematical relationships, spatially, as physical events rather than abstract symbols. Carmen was quiet during this. Her hands were around her coffee cup. Why did you tear them? Carmen asked Mira. Mira didn't look up. Because I thought he'd say I was wrong. Who? Whoever she wanted to show it to. Carmen set her cup down. She looked at Ms. Okafor. Is she wrong? No, Ms. Okafor said. She's not wrong. Carmen made a sound that was not quite anything. She pressed her lips together. She looked at the torn pieces again. And then she looked at Mira. Really looked, the same way she had looked after the conference. The same reaching quality that didn't have a name yet. And said, Can you draw it again? Mira looked up. You said you have it memorized, Carmen said. Can you draw it again? A silence. Mira reached across the table and pulled a piece of paper toward her from the stack near the fruit bowl. She picked up a pen from the counter. She drew it from memory. Every line. The 2 triangles, the rotation sequence, the intersecting curve, the notation. Exactly as it had been. It took 4 minutes, and she didn't hesitate once. Carmen watched her daughter's hand move across the paper. Her expression, quiet and careful, and carrying something that had been accumulating for a long time, changed. Slowly, the way light changes in the desert. Not sudden, just different. Okay, Carmen said. To Ms. Okafor, tell me about the university. They drove to Albuquerque on a Saturday. Mrs. Petrakis looked down at the pages she had failed. The same diagrams, the same equations, the same mind she had called not ready. Except now, university professors were calling it extraordinary. For a long moment, nobody in the room spoke, because the terrifying truth was finally impossible to ignore. Mira had never been bad at math. She was simply seeing it years before everyone else could. And somewhere tonight, there's another kid being told they're failing, simply because the world cannot yet understand the way their mind works. If stories like this move you, stories about overlooked genius, quiet resilience, and impossible comebacks, subscribe now. Because the next story might feel a little too real too.